Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I had a subscriber ask a question. And that's the beauty of all this. Some of the people are like, Jason, you're making so many videos. You're in front of the camera over an hour every single day, 7 days a week between your two channels. Are you ever going to run out of content? No, because people ask questions nonstop, and I'm assuming if you guys got questions, I never run out of video topics because somebody wants to know. So I'm going to put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, do a little crafting, and let's answer this question. The guy basically asked me, the subscriber, gentleman, young man, whatever we want to call him, he asked me if anabolics and other drugs, PEDs, give all these bodybuilders so much extra recovery, which now they do, but that's another topic in and of itself. God, that's another video already. If it gives them so much extra recovery, why don't they increase their frequency to get even more gains? Because it's been proven fairly reasonably. There's a good amount of data. Yeah, let's not say proven. Let's go with the fact that there's a good amount of data confirming, verifying over many years that higher frequency training produces faster strength and muscle gains for the most part within reason in drug-free lifters. Well, that's kind of the point. It does so in drug-free lifters. And again, we're not talking about total gains over the long term. We're talking about how quickly you gain them, because everyone's going to plateau eventually. That's reality. You're not going to gain indefinitely, and when you do, it'll slow down to a snail's pace. But we're talking about getting to that point quicker. Now, well, to answer your question, though, the problem is that the drugs themselves devalue, they depreciate the benefits of higher frequency training. Now, not in all regards, but rather at the muscle protein synthesis level. And what I mean is, people who use drugs, depending upon the combination and stack of whatever anabolic cocktail they're running, their muscle protein synthesis is elevated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, depending purely upon the cocktail of drugs in their system and where it's spiking throughout the week. That becomes the primary factor in elevated muscle protein synthesis once drugs come into the equation. Now, obviously, people use vastly different amounts and vastly different combinations, and even their blood serum levels aren't even the same around the clock and throughout the week. But that becomes the dominant factor. When you hop over to higher frequency training, one of the major benefits of high frequency training is the fact that it re-elevates muscle protein synthesis every couple days, meaning you get a 28 to 48 hour window, depending on how hard you train, how much workload there is, volume, etc., of elevated muscle protein synthesis, so that you have a bigger growth window. Well, with drugs in the mix, the drugs provide the growth window. You got the growth window all the time. It's just a matter of how much they're using. So one of the biggest benefits gets completely thrown out. It becomes really largely irrelevant. The benefit that tends to remain is the neural efficiency one. Well, neural efficiency meaning you can learn the motor patterns better, meaning if you do a higher frequency on an exercise, you're going to get stronger at it quicker because you practice it more. Just like throwing a baseball, there is a skill and a component to throwing a baseball or a football or a spear or anything else that you throw. That's motor unit learning, independent of the muscle you gain. Now, if that's your form of exercise is throwing an object, it's going to build muscle in all the muscles involved in it over time. Of course it will. You're exercising it. For something that requires force, power, that's going to make it bigger. But there's a nervous system component also of motor unit learning the pattern, getting more efficient at it, better at it, recruiting muscle fibers faster at it. You get that from weight training too. The problem is that is such a minor component of it once you get to training a muscle group for any long period of time, or an exercise, not a muscle group, the squat or the curl or anything else. You eventually reach a point to where you get very rapidly diminished returns on that because you've learned it already. And you'll get a little better, a little faster by doing it more often, or you'll help maintain your peak with it better if you start thinking about Bulgarian style training. But at a certain threshold, it starts really tapering off. Training it 2 or 3 times a week, 4 times a week starts giving such a small advantage beyond once a week once you've been doing it for years. It's still an advantage, and in a competitive environment, a 0.5% stronger squat could mean the difference between first and fourth place, right? So it matters, But to the bodybuilder, it's such a minor overload difference of, oh, I can squat 5 more pounds because I squat 3 times a week instead of once, or 10 more pounds. It doesn't matter to him at the end of the day because most of his growth is just coming from metabolic fatigue from training volume, with the drugs being then the primary dominant factor there. Starts to matter very, very little. Now, that being said, there are some top bodybuilders, I believe, who's the current Mr. Olympia, Phil Heath. Because I can't keep up with all these bodybuilders. Phil Heath, I believe, I read a while back, does train everything twice a week, not once. So he uses a little more frequency. But then again, there have been Mr. Olympias that train everything once every 8 days instead of twice every 7. So it really varies a lot with what they're doing. But at the end of the day, most of them take the approach of, since it's kind of understood with drugs that frequency matters less, they just go for training volume because they figure with all of the drugs in the mix, they're going to grow all the time anyway. So if they just come in and destroy a muscle, stimulate it maximally, try to get every last muscle fiber by doing 5 different exercises with high volume or whatever, that they're stimulating as much growth as they possibly can. They're not relying upon training frequency to re-stimulate muscle protein synthesis. They just need to induce some metabolic fatigue. That fatigue itself will stimulate all the growth they can probably handle. It will probably stimulate every last ounce of growth they can get just by hitting some serious metabolic fatigue on each muscle group, and the drugs themselves will handle the rest. In fact, we could argue, since we don't have data on it, we have very, very little data on it, we don't even know if the metabolic fatigue that they're inducing from the high volume is actually going to produce more gains than just the 1 set or 2 sets. We don't really know because we've never studied it at the doses bodybuilders use. All we know from studies is that people who use moderate amounts of drugs in a laboratory gain muscle faster while sitting on their asses than people who lift weights. We know that for an absolute fact. That has been confirmed multiple times in independent studies and has been repeated. 500-600 milligrams of testosterone in a laboratory puts more muscle on young men who stop lifting than guys lifting weights. Guys who had already lifted who just completely quit gain muscle faster. Now, bodybuilders are using a hell of a lot more drugs than that. Most of your top guys are a hell of a lot more. So these guys would grow sitting on their asses. It's fair to say these bodybuilders probably would too with their doses and their genetics. So honestly, the truth is we don't even know how much the training or the changes in training style or training volume actually affects their muscle growth. Is it fair? Is it a reasonable assumption to say, yes, they're going to gain faster from lifting weights while on these drugs? Yeah. Do we know that for a fact? No, it's never been studied. We have seen studies that show that guys who lift on the drugs do gain more, but not at the doses these guys are using. We also see that when people sit on their asses and do nothing, they gain muscle in direct proportion to the amount of drugs they take. Any group that takes the higher dose gains more muscle than the group at the lower dose when none of them are exercising. So when you think about it, when you start talking about these ultra doses and cocktails a lot of these bodybuilders are using, for all we know, they're growing so fast from the drugs themselves that it is possible that the training doesn't even matter at all, or that the training itself or how they choose to train, meaning one style of training over another, high reps, high frequency, low frequency, high volume, low volume, isolation compound, might only matter 1 or 2%, if at all. It might mean that their training doesn't do anything, that the drugs handle all of it at those doses, or that the way that they train only dictates a couple of percentages differences. Or they might only gain 5% more muscle or 10% more muscle actually training than sitting around doing nothing. We don't know. We can only speculate. I think it's fair to say the training, it's reasonable to assume that them training puts more muscle on them. But we have no evidence or any train of logic to follow that really tells us that guys on pro bodybuilder doses of drugs, that how they train has any impact at all on how much muscle they gain. We have no evidence for that. We have nothing but hypothesis with no real means to test them because of the ethics involved. And honestly, it probably doesn't matter at the end of the day. You know why? Because everyone who uses the kind of doses these pro bodybuilders are using is going to die young anyways. It's a niche sport. Oh God, I hate to use the word sport. Performing art. that very, very few people care about. In fact, if guys on YouTube hadn't made it popular again, fitness YouTubers, no one would even know or care about pro bodybuilding. It died out again since Arnold's era. It's just, I think YouTube and the internet has brought it back up into the limelight, and only because supplement companies are tied to it, and because some big fitness YouTubers are tied to it. Other than that, I don't think anyone would even care. So at the end of the day, is it even worth studying or knowing? Probably not, because very few people out there really give a shit. I don't. Because you know what? I also know that at the end of the day, even if they don't get the training right, there's no point wasting the effort figuring it out for these pro bodybuilders. We know that if they just increase the dosage, they'll continue to grow faster anyways. So that's always the ultimate fix for these guys. And it probably doesn't really matter. So the question of why don't they train at a higher frequency, because there's no reason to believe that a higher frequency at those drug doses is going to do anything to increase their gains like it does in people drug-free. Just no reason to think that it would biologically, when you consider the reasons why it works. And at the end of the day, we truthfully don't even really know, because there's no data on it, no studies on it, because the No Ethics Board is going to allow a study of people consistently, 10 different people using the exact same kind of doses that is regulated in a lab, being prescribed doses that these sort of pros use so that you can control the variables. There's never going to be a study that's going to allow us to study this, and there shouldn't be, because honestly, you're talking about a horrifically bad set of scientific ethics to even allow that to happen. Like, it would never make it through a medical review board, other than maybe during Nazi Germany at Auschwitz or something. That would be the only sort of review board that would allow that to inject that many drugs in a controlled environment into a human being to do muscle biopsies on them after. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.